Hello, my name is Sandra Elliott, and I am the English Learner Intervention Support Specialist for the Mississippi Department of Education. Today our presentation is titled Starting Off Right, Identifying English Learner Students. It is part of our ongoing series of English Learner Literacy Tips. New tips and videos will be added each month from August to December during the 2017-18 school year. We like to begin each of our presentations with the Mississippi Department of Education's vision, which is to create a world-class educational system that gives students the knowledge and skills to be successful in college and the workforce, and to flourish as parents and citizens. Our mission is to provide leadership through the development of policy and accountability systems so that all students are prepared to compete in the global community. The State Board of Education has a 5-year strategic plan for 2016 through 2020, which includes the following. All students are proficient and showing growth in all assessed areas. Every student graduates from high school and is ready for college and career. Every child has access to a high-quality early childhood program. Every school has effective teachers and leaders. Every community effectively uses a world-class data system to improve student outcomes. Every school and district is rated C or higher. Our goals for today's session are to help you in identifying English learner students in your classroom, understanding the Lost Links assessment and reports, understanding general accommodations and modifications for English learner students. So let's begin today by looking at identifying English learner students. The federal definition of English learners is an individual who is enrolled or preparing to enroll in an elementary or secondary school that's aged 3 to 21, not born in the United States, or whose native language is a language other than English, exhibits difficulties in speaking, reading, writing, or understanding the English language, which contributes to the individual's ability to meet the state's proficient level of achievement on state assessments described in Section 1111B3, achieve in classrooms where the language of instruction is English, or participate fully in society. In the identification process, we first give a home language survey, then conduct an initial language proficiency assessment. We then notify the parents of the English language eligibility, place the student in an EL program, and develop an English language service plan. Mississippi guidelines for identifying English language learners state that each school must have a clear identification process. Most school districts do this through a home language survey given to families when a student enters school. The survey typically asks what languages are spoken in the home, what languages are spoken most often by the student, and what languages the student is able to read. If your school has an English learner teacher, generally they will come to you and let you know that you have an EL student in your classroom. However, you may need to go to your school's EL teacher and find out if you have any English learner students. If your school does not have an EL teacher, or your EL teacher is not in your building very often, you can usually find the home language survey in the student's CUME or other designated place determined by your building principal. Do this even if you do not suspect that any of your students are English learners. Many times students sound like proficient English speakers. However, they still may not be proficient by testing standards, or they may still be monitored by the English learner teacher. Now let's look at the home language survey. It is completed during registration. It is issued to the parent or guardian. It provides needed information to determine if an additional assessment is needed. Lost Links Screener serves as Mississippi's initial assessment. It should be completed within 30 days of enrollment at the beginning of the year and within 2 weeks of enrollment for students enrolling later in the year. Even if the registration is done online, the home language survey needs to go in the CUME or other designated place. Parents are notified of eligibility after the LostLink screener is administered. They have the right to know that their child is eligible to receive services in a language instruction program. Parents also have the right to waive participation and remove their child from the district's English language instructional program. However, whether the student is in an EL program or not, supports must still be provided by the classroom teacher. If a student has been classified as an English learner based on the home language survey and the LostLink screener, the student is still required by federal law to take the English language proficiency assessment until the student has tested proficient in English. Please note that parents have the right to deny EL services but cannot deny EL testing. We develop the language service plan after the student is identified as an English learner. You should file the language service plan and update it as needed. It should be developed and updated through the student evaluation team. That committee must include, at the minimum, the English learner teacher, the general education teacher, a school administrator, and the parent representative. This team should meet at least quarterly. Next steps. Once we identify them, we are able to place the identified English learner students in a sound language instruction educational program in addition to mainstream classes. We also need to ensure that the student receives the help needed to be academically successful if parents decline English learner services, and that's the responsibility of the local education agency. Practices to avoid. We should try to avoid identifying students by outward appearance or origin of birth. For example, there may be students in your class who are Hispanic but who are not English learners. We should try to keep in mind that ethnicity is not an indicator of EL eligibility. We also want to avoid eliminating students due to outward appearance or origin of birth. You may have a student who outwardly looks like all your other students, but who may have been born in another country and does not speak, read, or write English. Understanding the LostLinks assessment. LostLinks is the Language Assessment System test. It is a research-based English language proficiency assessment that measures the speaking, listening, reading, writing, and comprehension skills of K-12 students. It includes a screener that serves as Mississippi's initial placement test. It is given in the spring. This year, the window is from March 1st to April 13th. Administering the LostLinks assessment. The LostLinks screener and end-of-year assessment are secure testing materials and must be administered by a licensed teacher who has been trained to administer the test, be proctored by other personnel who have been trained in test security rules and regulations. Test administrators and proctors may be, but do not have to be, the English learner teacher. The test does not have a time limit. The spoken portion of the screener is administered one-on-one. The spoken portion of the end-of-year assessment has a microphone that students speak into. Their answers are digitally saved. There's an interpretation guide that comes with the LostLinks materials. And each school has the following materials to help you understand the many reports available for each child: an interpretation guide, a digital assessment library, and an instructional library provided by LostLinks. If you do not have these items in your building, contact your district testing coordinator. The interpretation guide also contains letters for parents available in different languages. Now let's look at some sample LostLinks reports. We will be looking at the student proficiency reports, the roster reports, and strand reports. The top half of this report, shown in this slide, represents the student's obtained scale score and performance indicators against the 5 proficiency levels. This report serves numerous purposes, which includes use in each student's folder for identification, progress monitoring, and exit. This report can also be used to identify each student's strengths and weaknesses in regards to each of the areas in which a student is tested. So looking at this student's report, we can see that while they are proficient or above proficient in most areas, they are still in the early intermediate range for writing. This shows the classroom teacher that the student will need continued scaffolded support in writing, including the use of graphic organizers and additional writing supports. Due to this lower performance level in writing, they would still qualify for English Learner Services. We'll go over the criteria for exiting EL services in just a few minutes. Here we are looking at the bottom half of the student proficiency report, which represents the student's obtained scores in the Lost Links language context strands. The Lost Links language context strands were designed to be appropriate and consistent with what is taught in school and the goals of the college and career readiness state standards. These scores represent how this same student is scoring with respect to the content areas. So for example, when we look at the reading section and the RGA, which is the expected average performance based on Lost Links field testing, we would expect the student to score a 6. However, this student has scored a 4 in both content areas. So while this student is strong in social English skills, they're still going to need some support in the content areas to help them truly grasp the content being taught. And this is sometimes the part that teachers struggle with when they have a student who seems proficient because socially they can communicate well, but they still have some areas where language is still a factor in their learning. Roster report. This report provides student lists showing last name, first name, content skill area, the student's scale score, and performance levels. All of these fields can be used to sort the report in ascending or descending order. In addition, from this report, you can click on any student's name to go directly to the student proficiency report. Summary report of Strands. This 5th grade summary report of Strands indicates a group's performance on each area of the test and the test form administered to them. Roster data within each content area is available when the user clicks on the content link. Note that foundational skills for reading and writing are measured in grades K through 3 only, so they're not shown for this 5th grade report. Exit criteria. An English learner student may exit the program when the student scores 4 or 5 on the reading section of the Lost Links, and scores 4 or 5 on the writing section of the Lost Links, and scores 4 or 5 overall on the Lost Links. It's important to note that a student must have a 4 or 5 in all 3 areas in order to be considered for exiting EL services. Even then, a student must be monitored for 4 years once they have exited. Testing results. Results availability. The screener is scored by the school's English learner teacher or the person designated by the school's principal. Results for the screener are available as soon as scoring is completed by the school's designated person. End-of-year test scores are partially available within a week of completing the test, but final and official results are available by June 16th. How do test scores affect the school scores? Well, MAP scores for EL students are calculated in with all other student scores except for those students for whom this is their first year in the United States. If your school has 10 or more English learner students, this is considered a subgroup under the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's important to note that subgroups are looked at very carefully under ESSA. So showing growth or not showing growth on the Lost Links assessment may then give your school a plus or minus on your school's rating. Now let's look at some accommodations and modifications available for EL students. Success of our English learner students can be significantly impacted by implementing appropriate accommodations and modifications. Accommodations don't change the actual content being delivered. They're add-ons, tools that ensure that students can demonstrate what they know without lessening their expectations. Modifications are changes made to the core content so that the learning objectives are different and more accessible for the student. The English learner teacher will work in collaboration with the student evaluation team to develop an English language service plan. That plan will identify acceptable accommodations and modifications which vary by individual student and vary depending on the language proficiency level of each student. Modifications are typically implemented when they are written in the language service plan or an IEP. They change the content or learning objectives, so teachers should try as many accommodations as possible. You should try to maintain instruction for the standard or skill, but you can modify the reading material level as needed. Teachers should provide documentation of the accommodations and modifications used and their results. Examples of accommodations. Alternate responses. Doing things like offering multiple choice or fill in the blank to cover the same content. Advanced notes. Remember that your EL students are taking in a lot of information. Having advanced notes helps them to see the overall goals of the lesson as well as allows them to follow along without struggling to mentally interpret while trying to get the gist of the lesson. Extended time. Remember that your EL students are thinking in 2 languages, so it will naturally take them longer to complete classroom tasks. Teacher modeling. When the teacher uses visuals and gestures, these seemingly small things can make a big difference in understanding for our English learner students. Simplified written and verbal directions will maximize clarity and minimize the potential for confusion. Frequent breaks. Remember that your EL students are using a lot of brain power to understand what you are saying, translate that into their own native language, and then retranslate into English. So frequent breaks are essential. The use of dictionaries and glossaries is especially helpful for older students who already know how to use these tools. Thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. We hope that you have found it helpful. If you have any particular questions regarding your English learner students or would like professional development for your staff, please contact Leanne Cheeseman. She is our Assistant State Literacy Coordinator and English Learner Coordinator for grades K through 3, or myself. Again, I'm Sandra Elliott. I work with the Office of Intervention Services, and I'm the English Learner Intervention Support Specialist for pre-K through 12th grade.